everyone, and welcome to this week's exegesis video. In this week's exegesis video, we'll be looking at a passage from Isaiah 6 verses 1 to 8, which is a passage that Charlotte preached to us on Sunday. And if you have the commentary pack, do have it open, because not only is the passage in the commentary pack, but there are commentaries as well on the passage that will help us to maybe understand the passage a bit more. But more importantly, at the end of the commentary pack, there are discussion questions that we'll be using as well, and that you could use to chat about the passage today.
Yeah, so let's do a quick recap of what Charlotte preached on Sunday. So as you mentioned, she was going through Isaiah 6, 1 to 8. So the sermon was about embracing confidence with humility. And in the passage, I think there was 3 parts to it. First, talking about the recognition of God's glory. So it started with the year that King Uzziah died. Isaiah saw the Lord, and his presence or his glory filled the temple, and that awesomeness of the presence of God was described in the passage. And then moving on to the wow, from wow of seeing God's presence to the woes, where you recognize that you are unworthy of God, and that recognizing his sin in that presence. And then from that it goes to where the confidence is, where God meets him and cleanses him, where the coal touches his lips with the coal from the altar, where that transforms him to a place of humbleness and humility, of recognition of who he is, to moving on to the confidence that
send me.
Yeah, he went here I am, send me, because you recognize that it's not you, but it's God, right? So yeah, that's the gist of the sermon, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the reading. There's only 8 verses, but we'll divide it into 4 bits, and focusing on the first 4 discussion questions. So let's start to read verses 1 to 4. I'll read together, and then we'll have a chat about what stands out to us. Isaiah 6 verses 1 to 4. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and 2 they covered their feet, and 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. So what stands out to you in this reading? It's very strange, right? The whole imagery.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, because Charlotte was talking about what the seraphim is, that I think that word seraphim means fiery, or something bright, right? But in the presence of God, these creatures were covering their faces and their feet and all that. They were in their brightness, God's presence was even brighter, even greater. But the interesting thing that stood out to me, and I think if you read through the commentary, some will say also that Isaiah saw the Lord, I don't know, is it a privilege, or God revealed to him or showed him, even in this, the seraphim had to cannot tahan, wow, this is just so much. But Isaiah saw the Lord and was able to stand before God and interact with him. It was
the thing that stood out to me was there's this thing that people and creatures say, they react whenever they see God, in both actually the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they sing this refrain, holy, holy, holy. And I think it's got to do with the Hebrew language. In English we have superlatives. We say something is beautiful, but we can also say something is very beautiful, which means that it's more beautiful than, you know, just the regular beautiful. But in the Hebrew language there are no superlatives, so the only way to express superlative like very is to just keep repeating the word. And so here we see a sense that God is not just holy, but He is holy, holy, holy. He's very, very, very holy. In the Old Testament, God's holiness is something that is both majestic and also terrifying, because it means that God will not be able to tolerate something that's different from Him, meaning things that are impure, things that are sinful. When it goes near to God, it just gets totally destroyed because of God's holiness. But yet we see here in the response of the seraphim that God is not the type that is like, you know, oh, very sombong, He's very proud, like, I'm very holy, you are not very holy, so you better stay very far away from me. We can see that the intent of that holiness is to fill the whole earth with God's glory. And Isaiah talks a bit more about this in the next few chapters. In chapter 11, I think Isaiah says, and the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters covers the sea. Another prophet says something very similar, Habakkuk, I think in chapter 2, and uses the word glory, and the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. So there's this intention that not just that God is holy, but He wants to fill the whole earth with that His presence, His holiness, and His glory, so that people will know Him. And of course, once we know Him, I think a lot of us will start to respond just as the way Isaiah will when we talk about it in the next section. So why don't, right now, in your own group, have a look at question number 1 and just share with each other based on the description in the first 4 verses. How does the imagery of God's throne, the seraphim, the temple, shape your understanding of God's character and majesty? And we'll meet you back after the break. Enjoy your discussion.
See ya. Hi guys, welcome back. I hope you had a great discussion with the first discussion question. So now we go to the second part of the reading, which is we'll just read and reflect on one verse for this part, which is verse 5. Let me read it. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Yeah, I think if we go to God and we see God and things like that, we will realize that we are not all that. We're not. I think Charlotte's preaching, she started with like there's 2 kinds of people. One that think that they are a gift to the world and they are everything, and the other one that thinks that they are nothing, like, you know, even if they're not there, it doesn't matter and all that. And I think when we see God and we see who we are in God, we know that we will realize that both ends or both extremes is not the truth, because of who He has made us to be and who He has a purpose in for creating us, and that we are not nothing, neither are we everything. And I think when we know who God is, we know that we're not worthy, and we'll see that we have our legs and we have our, so I think that keeps us humble when you come to God and you really recognize that God has made us who we are, and yet we're not Him, everything that we have is from Him. And then also that He's also made us with every other creation and people, and that everyone else is also loved by Him, called by Him. that puts it into perspective lah. Like he uses us, but he also uses other people, that then it keeps us humble, and that we're not the gift to the world, or the only gift to the world, right?
Yeah, there's a sense also, like Sian said, we recognize that we are not all that, and we also recognize that humanity is special. In all of God's creation, we are special because we are made after God's own image. And I think in one of the Psalms, Psalm 8, is that God, the psalmist says, God made humans a little lower than the angels, but crowned us with glory. And the word glory is there, but applied to us. And so I think we need to think, like Sian said, we have to kind of avoid two of those extremes, thinking that we're all there, that we're everything, but also kind of lapsing into despair, just ending the story here. And the story doesn't end with Isaiah's cry of woe is me. It goes on actually, and it does end with how Charlotte talks about a kind of confidence that comes up when Isaiah responds, here am I. It ends with that kind of recognition that we are also, in a sense, crowned with glory. God created us to be special because He created us to be people that will reflect His glory into the world as well. And maybe you guys can right now can take a few minutes to also talk about Isaiah's response. And maybe if you had a similar response sometimes in worship, in encountering God as well, kind of an awareness of your own unworthiness and your own sinfulness. And so the question is, what does Isaiah's reaction to God's glory teach us about humility, and how can we cultivate a similar humility in our own lives?
Have a good discussion.
Alright, welcome back everyone. Hope you had a good discussion. We will continue with the third chunk, which is two verses 6 to 7. Let me read it. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." What are some of the things that stand out to you? Again, it's quite strange, right? So we started off being this imagery, it's quite amazing, quite otherworldly. We have a lot more of this image right now in this verses 6 to 7.
Burning coal sounds painful. Like,
yeah. It's like when you don't talk about coals, even when you drink soup and the spoon is a little bit too hot, we recoil from it.
Then it leaves a lingering burn. There's a reminder that you got burned for a few days. Is there something that you can recall about maybe an encounter that really made you realize that you needed purification, or a story that came out of that? Do you have?
Interesting question. Nothing comes to mind at the moment, but I do remember instances in worship in particular. And there's a sense of worship being where we really kind of see God, because in this passage there's a sense that Isaiah encounters God in the midst of worship. The seraphim, the angels, and whatnot, they are worshipping God, and in that encounter, then you recognize that you are not worthy, that you are sinful. So I don't really have a story that comes to mind where I kind of realize my own sinfulness beforehand, but there are many instances where in worship, when we sing songs, or even songs that just talk about God's love for us, and then I realized that actually God's love is amazing because it extends to me even in times when or especially in times when we don't feel like we are worthy, or we've done something wrong, we maybe said something unkind to each other before we went to church, and then we sing these songs and we encounter this God who loves us, who calls us, and who receives us as we are. And then we realize that, yeah, we really are quite unworthy.
Yeah, I think a position of humility, what do I want to say, like, in the sense that when you are keeping humble, is where we ought to be lah. That we know that we're not all that. But when we are not humble, I think I'm just thinking back of like instances where you think that you're all that, or you think that you got it all figured out, and when you lose that humility is when you, if you look back, I think as I get older, or maybe have been through more experiences, you realize that, oh my goodness, I was so dumb then, thinking that I got it right and I'm better than people, or like telling people off when you're not humble or things like that. That's when you realize that, oh my goodness, it's when we have gone through and we have seen, we have more grace, and we understand that people are through different journeys and going through different times, that we realize that, hey, you didn't get it all figured out, you don't have it all together. And I think it's that realization that humbles us in life, I'm just saying in general. So it's like the times of pride, or the times of thinking that we are better than others, is, I think, the ones that makes us regret, like kind of be like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Should be more kind.
Yeah, I should be more kind or gracious. And I think, and then sometimes it's painful because maybe there was relationships that have broken down, things that might have been said that you can't take back. And I think that's the pain from the result of us thinking that we're all that, and having that pride. Yeah, so I think maybe those experiences that I can think of as naive and young and foolish. So we'll like you guys to discuss among yourself about your reflection on these few verses, how maybe you share your experiences in realizing when you come into the presence of God, or you have experienced some kind of transformation or realization that you have with each other. And yeah, go ahead.
Have a good discussion. See you guys back.
So let's read Isaiah, verse
6 verse 8.
6 verse 8, sorry. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. So this is the part that Isaiah responds in confidence, as God has seen him and God has cleansed him. And then this is the response part that we were talking about. It didn't end at just the realization, but there was something. So would you like to share what is your reflection on this section?
Yes, I mean, there's so much to love about these passages, but the word that caught my eye, actually before verse 8, is in verse 7 how the seraphim says to Isaiah, your guilt is taken away. And I was just thinking of how often when we do something wrong and when we realize it, the guilt actually is kind of like, it makes us apprehensive, it makes us unsure, it makes us lack confidence. If I've done something wrong to say my wife, I said something unkind, then the next time I interact with her, there's a sense that, oh, there's a bit more distance, there's a lack of confidence. And I love how not just in Isaiah, right here in Isaiah 6, but in the gospel as well, that our guilt is taken away. Our sin is atoned for and our guilt is taken away. And I love how Isaiah changes to be like a totally different person with that realization that the sin is gone and the guilt is taken away. He kind of like, I love how the last statement is like, it ends with an exclamation mark. Here am I, send me. You can't get more confident than that. From going from like seeing God and saying, oh, woe is me, or game over, I cannot even be in this space. How can I see God? To like, well, here am I, send me. Let me be your agent to speak for you, to do things for you. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think for me is the part that firstly God's voice. God said, whom shall I send? The offer or the question to Isaiah, of course, is, I mean, we don't hear anyone else in this picture, so I'm assuming that, hey, I'm talking to you. Yeah. God is extending that question to Isaiah. So it's like, I feel like, yeah, that God is extending that I think the word is like asking, inviting us to participate in it. Like, now you have seen me and you know who you are, and I'm sending you out, and I think that's the confidence. It's like in that realization of our brokenness, our unworthiness and all that, but God still extends it to us that, come do this with me, come join me. And I thought that's really,
yes. And the discussion question 4 is, how can we cultivate a God confidence that doesn't rely on our own abilities but on God's power? And we've just celebrated Pentecost, and one of the passages that talk about Pentecost is Acts chapter 2. It talks about God's power through the Holy Spirit resting on all His people. And so I think, and again, in the New Testament, God's Spirit is often known as the Holy Spirit. And there's a similar, well, not smoke, but there's a similar kind of sense that when the Holy Spirit shows up in the upper room where the disciples were in Acts chapter 2, there's this temple imagery, there are like tongues of fire, there's a wind blowing, and in other parts of the Old Testament, like for instance in Isaiah 6, there's smoke as well. And these are all signs of, they're called a theophany, when God shows Himself, when God manifests Himself. And so there's a sense that there's the same holiness, the same God, but now in the New Testament, after we celebrate, or why we celebrate Pentecost, it's a reminder that this same holy God puts His Holy Spirit in all of us. And firstly, I think as the coal makes Isaiah pure, takes away his sin and his guilt, and empowers him, it's the very same way that the Holy Spirit does it for us today. The sacrifice of Jesus atones for our sin, and the Holy Spirit makes us holy. The very presence of God resting on us, and not just makes us holy, but gives us that power to walk out in our calling, to bring God's holiness and His glory, reflecting His glory back into the world in all of our lives. And I think I just love that parallel, that we can actually respond in the very same way. Even if today we don't feel like we are particularly gifted, that we can share the gospel or preach, or we're not very charismatic or very eloquent, but there's a sense that we all are invited into this. God says to us still today, who shall I send? And there's a sense that we can all respond like Isaiah did, with confidence. Here am I, send me.
Yeah, I think just now when you mentioned like what you liked about it being relational, like from realizing, from encountering God to then how we respond and how we move. I think when it talks about humility, I mean here when I'm reflecting, we use the word humility is usually a very relational thing. I mean you you're humble and in your own house, nobody will say that there's anything there, right? But it's a realization of that we are in a bigger picture, and there's other things around us, and there's things to be done, and also the same for calling. When we say like we have a calling, it's how we interact with other people or the world, or like our place in wherever we are, our community. And I think that this part is not just about me and my encounter with God, me and my relationship. That is first and foremost the first part that we need to realize. But from that, then how does it affect where we are, where we are placed, and our calling to those around us.